Can you analyze for us the ethical implications of self disclosure and personal expressions within the practice of art therapy?
Self disclosure, I was talking about this a few days ago, needs to be there when it supports your client. This person is talking now about their grief. There's a stuck point that happens where this person starts talking about the guilt around the loss. At that point, if there is a relevant bit of self disclosure that helps transform that.
How express arts therapy in articulating and understanding their mental health struggles, particularly when verbal communication is challenging.
Child moved from a different country, suddenly was put into school here, speaks perfectly at home. The minute you take this child to a stranger, silence. So you ask this child, what's your name? Mm-mm. Now, art therapy becomes a fantastic tool in this space. The pressure on talking has been taken away.
If this goes on for long, it'll be the single biggest issue.
Look at the larger part of our population that we still are struggling to reach out to.
Any client, any situation, broken you down to a point where you've needed therapy yourself?
Personally pushed me to a place where a lot of my traumas came up, a lot of my struggles, memories started coming to the surface, because a great reminder that as therapists, we need to work on our struggles.
Do you think individuals can support the mission of express art therapy in their own communities?
The problem with that is not everything works out in a 2+2 format. Got a generation of people who are struggling to problem solve, who feel like if this doesn't happen, then there is nothing. If I don't get a 99%, life is over.
What is the single biggest misconception about art therapy? The art of healing comes from nature, not from the physician. Therefore, the physician must start from nature with an open mind.
Look for the silver lining whenever a cloud appears in the blue.
Hello and welcome to Between Us. Make every conversation count. And today I have with me Aditi Kaul, who's an art space therapist. And we are going to talk about how art creates impact and helps us improve our mental health. And we are going to talk about every form of art that can be used as a therapy to improve our mental health. And I'm truly looking forward to this conversation. And Aditi has already been a guest in our earlier episode titled What's the Holiday Spirit Anyway? Aditi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
As am I.
All right, we begin with the first segment, Aditi, and we call it What Matters. Mhm. So, I've always wanted to ask you this question since our first podcast together. Examine for us the integration of express art therapy into unconventional settings such as schools, prisons, hospitals, and community centers.
So it's interesting because now, thankfully, I'm so glad this is an interesting question, that these aren't very unconventional settings. Most of these ones that you've mentioned, now we're being able to access,
Mhm.
are reaching out.
Even prisons?
No, so I was going to come to that. That's where expressive arts therapy is not something that I'm aware of that has gone in there. It's split into, a therapist might go in for supportive work if the prison would so like it, or you'll have vocational things. So the concept of an art therapist going in is something that, in my knowledge, is not something that's happened. The impact can be profound. The closest I've got to that is in a care and protection facility with children, which is not, I mean, it could be a 17-and-a-half-year-old, right, is also considered under 18, under either care and protection or in the juvenile justice system.
Yeah.
So I've worked with the JJ Act and the system as well. And you realize the challenges as a therapist are immense, but just the nuances of what led someone there, what is the narrative or the struggle that this person is carrying, and the work done, again, not with everybody. There will always be a percentage that perhaps is not, there is nothing you can really do. But there will be such a strong percentage, and it's the same thing that we hear about in prisons, where doing remedial work will actually potentially change their future chances of committing crimes, or And I think it's just that space hasn't been available.
Mhm.
Well, that's the hope. And yeah, that would be a very powerful setting to bring expressive arts therapy to.
And as always, I try to slide in things to push my podcast. So we have set of three guests coming in Mumbai next month. These are people who were in prison
Mm-hmm.
and they've come out, and now they're doing things to help other prisoners. And my mind just went there. And the reason why I said that is I felt express art therapy in prisons would be a very, very important aspect, especially for the women prisoners. who, You know,
Yeah. I mean, I think for wrongful convictions, different things that happen while you're there, it's a huge space.
yeah.
Luckily, again, I will reiterate that schools, we're doing so much work with hospitals. I mean, I work in a hospital, organizations, a lot of NGOs who might be working in these spaces. One can connect to as a mental health professional, and so it's really changed. So I'm so happy to hear that one setting still stands, perhaps as
Mm.
unconventional, but yeah.
Can you analyze for us the ethical implications of self disclosure and personal expressions within the practice of art therapy?
Hmm.
We
Okay,
tend to ask very easy questions.
very easy. Cakewalk.
Yeah.
No, but I think two things.
Mm-hmm.
One, the ethical implications in art therapy of self disclosure stand the same as in any therapist's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Self disclosure, I was talking about this a few days ago, um, needs to be there when it supports your client. It
Okay.
is not done because you suddenly remembered something or resonated with it.
Can you elucidate that for me?
Okay, so let's say my client is talking about a trauma that they have had.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, let's say, a 10-year-old has come to me for grief work and finally starts to talk about, or no, let me try and fit everything into the same example. A 10-year-old has come in for grief work and the child is not talking about the grief.
Hmm.
And we're going through the art therapy process and they're emoting in different ways. Now, an incorrect space for self disclosure, let's say if I've experienced some form of grief or maybe the same form of grief, would be that the child is not mentioning it, but I see something that resonates with me personally. And my brain sparks, and suddenly I decide that, oh, this is the moment. If I say what I've lost or what I've struggled with, it'll help this child also open up or talk about it.
Hmm.
That would be inaccurate
Mm-hmm.
because I have now taken over the session. I have taken a decision unilaterally to see that they are ready to somehow disclose because it resonated with me at a personal level. It was not a therapeutic move,
Yes. Yes.
and that is inaccurate. Let's say this person is talking now, finally, 6 months in, about their grief. It's making sense through the art process and play or narrative, whatever we've done in the session. And they've talked about the loss and what they felt. And there's a stuck point that happens where this person starts talking about the guilt around the loss. That I think I could have done something. Had I done something differently, I would not have lost this person. And we're just unable to move from that stuck point. At that point, if there is a relevant bit of self disclosure that helps transform that, there it would be helpful. Again, would it be better to bring in, let's say I'm working with a child, a mother who'll also share and be able to help with that piece of guilt in that process that could transform it and might not need my self disclosure at all?
Hmm.
Then I will do that. So it's very hard, but to examine, are you doing it for you? Because you're like, "Ah, I felt this, I've gone through this. Or is it going to help the person you're working with and
Okay.
humanize you and build a connection that might actually help them process where they are? I think that's perhaps the best I can do with this
All right.
question.
So the next, I wouldn't say question, but the next natural, organic lead up would be, um, how do you investigate the delicate balance which therapists try to strike between guidance and interpretation in facilitating clients' organic artistic process?
Guidance and facilitation. Okay. So I think there are a couple of things. There are techniques we use. So usually when I follow something called the Expressive Therapies Continuum, which is a far newer form of looking at the expressive arts. And when I say newer, in the last 50, 60 years, which is very new. But somewhere the concept is that we utilize neuroscience to understand how we build therapeutic interventions, which also helps you put down your goals. And there's a very interesting format on understanding the whole person through the lens of the ETC. Now, when you talk about the balance between guidance and, so I'll come down to an activity space, right? I'm working with a client. It depends on the client. So my goal is initially to expose them to as many mediums as I can and see what they respond to, give them a range of spaces to engage with those mediums, which touch upon the cognitive, which touch upon the affective or emotional, which, and see where they're leaning. So someone, for example, who's very cognitive will potentially 90% or X% of the time, according to the ETC, step into using more rigid mediums, feel safer using a sketch pen, will write more words, be more descriptive in their art than embodied. Someone who's more affective will tend to take paint and chuck it on the paper, flow out of the boundaries even. And I'm giving you extreme examples. None of us are fully on extreme. And work with that. That would then tell me how much I need to guide or not, which means, do I start to build boundaries? Do I start to evolve, taking them to another medium? But in terms of interpretation, the client will reflect. My goal is to ask the right questions to help them reflect on what then is created. But the utilization of theory and the massive barrage of techniques we have to decide what you're doing or where you are giving direction or not is important. And that is also based on the person, the diagnosis or the challenge they're coming with, and the theories that you have trained.
Fascinating. Okay. Interesting.
I also don't make it easy.
Okay. Let's discuss how express arts therapy aids individuals in articulating and understanding their mental health struggles, particularly when verbal communication is challenging.
So, okay.
Let's keep making it easier and easier for us.
I'll give you an example. So, selective mutism is a diagnosis. And I'm just giving you an example where quite literally, language is challenged, right? Where, let's say, a child coming in is not speaking. And I'll give you an example, not speaking in a school setting. Child moved from a different country, suddenly was put into school here, speaks perfectly at home, in front of the parents, in front of the siblings. The minute you take this child to a stranger, a person who's not part of that group of 4, silence. So you ask this child, what's your name? Child is about 7, 8 years old. School, not speaking a word, right? Anxiety, and again, I won't go into the details of what has led to it, but now art therapy becomes a fantastic tool in this space because 2 things happen. One, the pressure on talking has been taken away. Okay. So I'm not sitting and saying, no, batao, what are you feeling? I'll start with maybe even creating artwork of saying, okay, I'm going to start creating things I love and things I like because I want to get to know you also. So if you feel like it, join in. So initially the child might be tentative. I'm going to create images, start drawing, and the person feels like, okay, this person is really doing it. Parallelly, they'll start making art. So collaborative or parallel art can be a first relationship tool or step. Then as the child or the individual coming in learns that the art form is also a language, they start communicating through it. So I'll start telling you things through the art. This example of the person I'm talking about eventually spoke after a month in session. But I knew so many things about them. I recognized the pattern slowly of just how long it would take them to pick up the art material, to draw, to ask me if they can go outside of the boundary. Can I draw here? Should I draw in the center? So it started bringing to the forefront the different little anxieties of how they wanted to be liked and validated. And it felt very anxious because suddenly, culturally, this was a lot of pressure in the academic system. And then we use different art therapy tools to help and support, and it changed completely. But what's very powerful is when verbal reflection started to happen later, one of the things this child said was, and children are remarkable and so much brighter and have a lot more insight when given the chance.
And I think what really helps is when they are very authentic, like it just helps so much because that builds in transparency, right? It's so much easier for you to connect.
Fantastic. And I think she said, you know, you never told me to talk. You never said a word. And you never asked me to talk. You never said anything. And I know I talked sometimes in the middle. Like, oh, can I have that? Or wow. Or, just those words started coming out. And that's all this person needed, was understanding that they could safely express themselves through different ways. Now, this is a very specific example. But let's say an adult is coming in who's more descriptive in their art, who's very cognitive, who can explain to me verbally at length. And a lot of clients will come in like that, saying, I'm struggling because, this happened in my life, this happened in my life, this happened in my life. Now fix. But it's not working. I know it, but I'm not feeling any better. So there is intellectual insight, but no other kind, right? It's not really been processed or understood fully what's going on.
What is your process when you encounter these situations? Do you have a set process?
So essentially what the theory I was talking about, the ETC talks about, is you start meeting the client where they are. First you understand them, which can be understood in, if I say, Santosh, what medium would you like to use? And you're like, can I pick any medium? Can I start with this? Okay, you only tell me what medium you want. So it starts with how the person processes your initial, choosing of mediums, how long they take to start creating, what they create. Are they more descriptive? Are they more embodied? So will they write lots of words, say, Acha, this means this, let me write about it, versus just rubbing paint on paper and saying later in reflection that yellow means this for me, or, this is just how I was feeling in the moment.
Writing's so powerful.
Yes. But it's also more cognitive. Because it's a tool that we use. Again, there are fantastic techniques around free and expressive writing by someone called James Pennebaker, who just changes the whole process of how we write, and it's
Huge
magnificent.
fan. Yeah.
Fantastic. But I think the idea is that what art does is it breaks down our defenses. It looks at allowing us to express ourselves outside, whether in writing, visually, whether in body and symbols, whether in creation of music. And it's a mirror. So Margaret Nomberg talked about the art as a mirror, which is that the therapist doesn't have to say, dekho, this means this. That eventually, once the client sees it as a language that they're speaking in, they will themselves look at it and say, I can't believe this came up. Or I didn't, like I told you about certain pieces of art that I've created where I didn't understand their meaning earlier until I actually got into the process. And then, it strikes you. But it is a mirror, because anything you create, even if you're pretending, comes from why you need to pretend. Why do you have to create like this in this setting?
Right. Because, here in the podcast, I keep saying this, that the most important story is the story you tell yourself. And it just comes from within. Super. Can you dive into the various modalities of expressive art therapy, including art, dance, music, and writing, and their unique benefits?
Okay. So they will have overlapping benefits, but there are some things that sort of separate them. And actually, one of the things, and maybe I'll open with that I use is intermodal art therapy. Someone called Sean McNiff and Paolo Nil came up with this concept where initially there were independent schools of therapeutic intervention. So you have visual art, separate entire school, music, drama, stories, play, everything had their own theory, their own, And these guys came into the picture and said, but the power of art is in recognizing where they support each other.
True.
So, for example, in sessions, I will use visual art with a client, let's say, where I'm looking at the affective space of it. But I will use music to support that affect, because the kind of music I play will potentially tie into what comes up in the artwork. Will give them a sense of safety. Similarly with movement. Sometimes I worked with an old age facility, and they were all on wheelchairs, and they said, "Okay, you can't movement आप कैसे करोगे? And do singing कर लो and play antakshari with them and whatever." And so they were nice enough to give me resources, but we put chart paper across the floor. We rolled them through paint, the wheelchairs, and we played music, and they moved, and it was magnificent because they created art. There was movement. We did a little bit of a statue, so they had to pause them when I would pause the music. They could refill, they could ride into more paint. But somewhere the power of interlaying arts, where they support each other, is what these two theorists talked about. Now, for example, now I'll give you go back to your actual question where I digressed. Writing has shown immense power in allowing people to make sense coherently, feeling more in control of what they're experiencing. And, well, Penny Baker talks about, and through his research, a change in immune function. So let's say even if someone would not like to share verbally with a therapist, even that process of writing can actually completely change a large percentage of how they're feeling, minus the sharing of that writing itself. Right? So that's one, where writing is about coherence, making sense, taking control. Visual art has a fantastic ability to help people with the mirror function, which is build insight, which is process, reflect, and the other one is transform. Visual art mediums, you can change. I can tear sheets of paper. I can build with clay. I can turn, I remember one of my clients doing this who made a monster, which was their monster of their anxiety and their trauma. And this monster was full of papers and different colors, and it was terrifying to look at. And after creating it, they felt relieved. They also felt like I could sense that you don't want to sit with this monster in your house.
But it's out from within them.
Yes. And then the second step, which you can only do with art, which is what makes it different, was I said, okay, does this monster still look like this? And, it suddenly throws
What
you.
was the response?
I said, no. So I said, okay, what's changed? I said, change it. Change it to what it looks like now. And I think in the process of art, it's amazing because as you create, you think. And this person started pulling out sheets of paper, newspaper. It was like a big blob of different sheets stuck together. And pulled out and then kept twisting it and moving it. And now it just became colored sheets. And made a flower and made a rock. And slowly, slowly transformed part of it and put it around the monster. So we sat and I said, okay, this is where you are. And now we can document things. So we took a picture and that went into their file to remember that this piece of art was one. And I said, what would you like it to look like? And the entire monster over the course of 2 sessions then was transformed whilst verbally talking about, okay, what could I actually do? What are the steps? When I say this is a rose, this is a rock, what do these mean in my life? But so cathartic, so empowering, but transformative. The reminder that you can change, that it is in your hands, and with the right kind of support. So sometimes we'll say that, what do you need for this to happen? Symbols like the bridge. If you had to bridge this to this, what would the bridge look like? How many steps would be on that bridge? What would it be made of? That is the unique power of visual art. Then, what did you ask me?
A lot like making peace with yourself.
I feel like it's one of those, it's like the whole process of meaning making comes to the forefront. With movement, it's somatic. The parts which other forms of art can't touch is physiological. How do I control, process my arousal? What happens to my heart rate when something, when I get triggered? So essentially, the first time I experienced a movement workshop, it was very powerful because it suddenly challenged me at a somatic level. And memories and traumas that we hold are very often somatic, which means we would have experienced them when we were pre-verbal. Maybe we couldn't talk. Cognition hadn't actually taken full root because brains were growing and developing. And so in fight, flight, or freeze, very often clients who have childhood traumas will actually store all the memories in their body and not be able to make sense of it because the body was never then later used to release it.
Yeah.
So movement therapy becomes very powerful in any work where which is all work actually, where the somatic space gets included.
So let me lead this up with uh, an important question, which is, can you provide insights into what individuals can anticipate when considering or embarking on their journey with express art therapy?
Hmm. That's actually a great question. One, anticipate or no, actually, this is not anticipation, that you don't have to be proficient at the arts. It's a big myth.
Yeah.
You don't need to be good at art, good at any of the art forms. You just have to be willing to engage with them and experience them and, step into the novelty of them. Two, expect that you will be engaged with the arts from the get-go. Expect also that there will be verbal reflection. Art therapy is not a space where you're just going to create and leave it.
Yeah.
So you're not going in to draw and paint and then say, okay, you felt good, okay, bye. So there's a lot of reflection, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of shifts. You feel very, very challenged at some points because your whole system is beginning to emote, is beginning to process. And the defenses start breaking, which is something I mentioned. What happens when our defenses fall is we start to see ourselves and we start to experience parts that were safely hidden away so that we could function. So I think expect that it's not just creation separate from yourself, that hopefully it becomes a language that you speak in that is very, very powerful.
Can you highlight the versatility of express arts therapy by showcasing its efficacy in different contexts, community centers to hospice care?
So I think multiple pieces. There's more and more efficacy now when we talk about it in terms of, and I keep reiterating this because it's important, is the impact it has on neural pathways, the fact that creativity and creative process actually looks at increasing flow state, which is our neocortex actually wakes up and is much stronger, the prefrontal slows down, and that completely changes what's happening physically, physiologically in our body. So whether it's community spaces that you're looking at well-being work, and when I say community, it could be community centers, it could be schools, organizations, groups that come together for support, families, working with group settings in hospitals of support groups with people, the diagnostic spaces, which is looking at trauma, where there's a lot of evidence for art therapy, disorders of childhood, whether it's ADHD, looking at working with children on the spectrum. There's a whole range. Neurocognitive work, which is older adults, Alzheimer's, dementia, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders. These are key areas where art therapy is well evidenced. Very often you'll work in collaboration with somebody else, whether a psychiatrist, whether another specialist, depending on what your client needs. But essentially, these would be the areas, and it is becoming more and more versatile because we're realizing more and more that it is a language we all spoke once and stopped because life made us stop talking in all of those ways.
So tell me, is it possible to present research-backed evidence supporting the effectiveness of express art therapy across populations?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. The ones I've mentioned. So there's also evidence where you know that, for example, someone coming in with who's got obsessive compulsive disorder and has been diagnosed and is being treated, typically the first form of treatment is not going to be art therapy. Right? It's going to be cognitive behavioral work because there are certain exposure techniques or certain techniques that are very, very powerful, well evidenced, that need to be done. So why will I start doing art therapy? Maybe this person later, when they're working on reintegrating into their lives or struggling with social relationships or self-confidence, would then maybe come into an art therapist if they so choose. So it's sort of like understanding, but trauma work. An art therapy space would be a fantastic primary care space because all of the evidence supports what the goals of working with trauma would look like.
I mean, now that I'm looking back, I feel that express art therapy is probably there right from the very beginning, even when you're looking at the cognitive side of it, right?
I'm happy to email you stuff.
Please do. Um, can you give, or let me put it this way, in the most lucid manner, can you share some advices as to when we can initiate an express art therapy process? Um, let's go back to the beginning of the food chain, from finding a therapist to understanding the session dynamics.
That's a tough one, but okay, let's attempt to simplify.
Yeah.
One, my sense would be research. And
Hmm.
I would say this for any, when you're looking for a doctor, when you're looking for multiple steps, research, see what comes up for you. Two, check back. Just because a name comes up doesn't mean someone is good or bad or fit for you. Whether they're good or bad is separate. Two.
First of all, I wish I had some kind of a superpower to say, to do away with the rating systems. Sometimes you look for a doc and you look at Practo and all those apps and you say 5 stars, 7 star. Due respect to everyone, I don't think that's the way to measure, right?
हाँ, so ये 2 steps हो गए.
Hmm.
3, I would do personally, and which I realize a lot of people do, is check with someone you trust if they know somebody, if someone's been and had an experience. So while the ratings don't matter, experiences really help us feel safe saying, okay, I had a good experience with this person.
Is there any kind of groups, like parents who actually have got had expressed arts therapy for their kids, or like, are there any groups where they can connect with each other, talk to each other, check back?
Think so. That's a great idea.
Hmm.
But I'll tell you how it happens is, let's say we do a lot of workshops in schools. So schools, we've built a community, like a web. So you'll have schools who reach out to us and be like, oh, I met this person and I need to send these parents to you, or this child is struggling with this, please help them. Or I am a parent myself, I'd like to come in because I'm struggling with my
That's a
teen
great starting
child.
point, actually.
Communities, if you ask, support you. There was some I'm forgetting the Instagram page, but a lot of these pages, people are putting down in comments names. So someone called me saying, I got the name, Artidote. Someone once called me and said, you were on the Delhi Artidote page and I found you and that's how I called you, because someone posted your name there. So there are online communities, I think, where people are talking about therapists. There are some organizations that have curated lists. So I studied at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. I know that they are trying to put together lists of therapists available in different cities, helplines available in different cities, things like that, where so you just have resources to be able to reach out.
And that's so awesome to hear, because that means the stigma is going away. Like,
I mean, it's shifted immensely in the last 10 years. That
absolutely.
I can attest to.
Huh.
I mean, there's still a lot more work to do, but it has. The fact that today people are calling me saying, I want an art therapist, is a game changer. There was art therapist was like, we would slip in art therapy at the initial stage. You'd come through a psychiatrist or a school, or now it's coming from everywhere and people are asking specifically for what they need, more than us having to say, oh, this will work well for you. So that's been very
Okay, coming back to the question, the process.
So you have now identified a therapist through these 3 steps. You reach out to them, you book an appointment, you go in, then you shop. So if it fits in the first couple of sessions and you can feel a sense of, because the first step in therapy is building and establishing a therapeutic alliance, right? Which is what? A relationship. Do you feel comfortable with this person? At a baseline, can you talk or create or make art or whatever the therapist is coming with them? Feel safe? You don't feel judged? Great. Then you continue. Then you work on your goals and build with this person, and that's how the process will unfold. If you don't, please, and please find somebody else. Everyone is not the same. Everyone will not be a good fit for you. It's different therapists, different schools of thought work differently for different people. I urge you to try somebody else, to find the right fit if that's what you need. Because one of the things I've heard is people get very demotivated when they've gone to one person and they've had a bad experience or it hasn't fit.
And that does not mean that express art therapy does not work. It probably does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it probably means that maybe you need somebody else who aligns with that.
Absolutely. And I think that goes across the board. And then we step into the therapeutic process, which in
Hmm.
art therapy would be building a rapport, increasing and building that rapport with the art material, or depending on what it is, whether it's movement, music, or visual art. Then slowly, after a couple of sessions, when you've understood where they fall, let's say if my theoretical space is the ETC, building and establishing goals with the client. After that initial sort of assessment phase, seeing also, do they need any other support? Do I need to make a referral to a psychiatrist, a special educator? Do I need to work with somebody else in collaboration? So that's how you'll find the process unfold.
So tell me something, Aditi. What has been the most challenging part of integrating express art therapy into a conventional healthcare setting? How have you personally overcome those challenges? And the second part of the question is, tell me, what is the single biggest misconception about art therapy? Because I think that probably are interlinked with each other.
Yes, actually, you are right. I think first off,
Mm-hmm.
in a healthcare space, very specific to a healthcare medical space, is that there's essentially an unspoken hierarchy of, importance. Right? What is the most important? So, is a neurosurgeon the most important? Is a heart surgeon the most important? A surgeon's the most important? Then comes the, let's say,
The
treatment
support,
facility.
anesthesiologist and stuff like that.
Correct. Or just someone who's treating a general physician. So, what is this imagined or created hierarchy of, importance that exists? How does now mental health is anyway perhaps the lowest rung in a healthcare hierarchy? It's changing a little bit now. Also because revenue generation is, a whole other world. Then comes art therapy within mental health, which is this new space. You don't understand it. It looks like frills and all good stuff. And I think the challenge of talking and communicating the science behind art therapy, the relevance, the impact, and the efficacy, like you asked me earlier, of art therapy in the healthcare setting, not just with clients coming in or patients coming in with mental health diagnosis, but physical health as well. Where does it come into cancer care? Where does it come into a long stay, patients who are admitted in the hospital? What does it do for anyone in an IPD who's a young child, who's an older adult? What is being in a hospital doing to our mental health, or being diagnosed with some physical struggle doing? So I think slowly, as we began to be able to show impact, talk about that impact clinically in a language that this community understood, the game started to change. So that was the biggest shift. Having a support system that also believed in what I was doing was very, very powerful, because I think the more you can build a community. I mean, I was one person. We now have a team of 10 art therapists within a mental health team of, I've lost count and it's beautiful. I don't know, 80, 100, I don't know where we've reached across the country.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the largest one unit mental health team across the country. And we have sports psychologists, we have, art therapists, we have psychoanalysts, we have clinical psychologists, special educators, the whole. And it's a luxury because you don't have that. And now we've broken into the space of where a neurosurgeon or a neurologist will call me saying, oh, you work really well with that client or that patient. I'm sending you more children like this. We're sitting in pediatric OPDs working with children to see if we can look at early diagnosis of a child, let's say, who's on the spectrum, who otherwise would be brought in far later. But he's coming for a pediatrician's visit and you're sitting right there. So I think it's taken a lot from being called balloon wali auntie by a nurse who would call in saying, aap aa jao, to now it being integrated and recognized to a large degree.
I still see when you said balloon wali auntie, for me, no, I still find hope in that, because at least that's
I was
lucid
being
for you.
called. Oh, yeah.
That's lucid for you. At least, there is someone who brings smile, or someone who probably helps them.
Yes.
Can you measure the impact of art therapy on the clients you've dealt with, especially those who have profound existential crisis?
Yes, as much as you can measure any other form.
Do you have any matrix of feedback, feedback form, or anything which is most telling?
So usually, I mean, most evidenced right now is assessments.
Mhm.
So let's say someone goes in for a psychological assessment or an evaluation at the start of the therapeutic process with a clinical psychologist. Then they go in through X months of therapy, and then let's say you do another one after that. Typically, finding a shift or a change on that would be a very evidence-based um, understanding of how something has evolved. However, most importantly, what you'll find it in is client feedback, in their ability to cope with then everyday life, more challenges that come their way. And in art therapy, you'll also see it in the artwork. So we always store artwork unless someone wants to really get rid of something through the course of therapy.
Huh.
We do something called an art review in visual art, where you actually, at different points in therapy, will pull out all the artwork and look at processing the shifts in art, the shifts in mediums, the shifts in narrative. And sometimes when you look back at an old piece you've done, you're like, wow, I know exactly what I was feeling there. I know what I was thinking. I know I was acting there. I know I was still trying to show you that I was doing good artwork. And now I don't even like, this is me. This is just me here 5 months in. I don't have to think. If you ask me how I'm feeling, I might crush a sheet of paper and like throw it at your feet. And I know that that's my art today. And I'll take a picture of that crushed ball of paper because it'll be a reflection. Versus then, if you ask me how I was feeling, I was like, Acha, I am not feeling great. Uska matlab kya hai? So it's not a language still. So it's various forms. But no, not a. I don't hand a feedback form to my clients to get that.
No, I think more than a feedback form, to watch it come live in front of you probably would be the best matrix. The final two-part question for this segment of What Matters. One, what advice would you give to someone who wants to pursue a career in express art therapy? Qualities or skills that are super essential for success in the field. And the second part of that is, how do you personally stay invested, stay motivated, considering the kind of emotional challenges you come across during therapy? And honestly, what keeps you going? And this is a question I've always wanted to ask because I always see you smiling, and I pray to God that you always do that. So, yeah.
So let's go backwards. What keeps me invested is I love, and I'm hard. It's hard for me to pretend. So I love what I do. I absolutely love it. I love working with the arts. I love that medium because it resonates personally with me. It makes sense to me on a scientific level. In the last 12 years, the kind of impact I've seen through the process of art therapy when I've used it with so many people is magnificent. And I think that keeps me going.
Okay, I'm just sending a little prayer to the universe that my friend Aditi continues to enjoy it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would hope so too.
Yeah.
And the other one is, I think, doing diverse things. Feeling like I'm learning so much, because I think as a therapist, if you're not interested in people's stories or narratives, you're in the wrong field. So I love learning from the narratives of my clients, of their experiences, of their cultures, of different things they come from, different perspectives they bring. And I think feeling like then you can reach out and have an impact and support someone in a process of their life, hopefully impact further generations that they will then produce, is very exciting for me. I think this keeps me going. Delving into and having the space to be able to dive into different parts of it, teaching, practice, training, podcasts, all of it. I think that's also something that helps my slightly ADD brain function.
So, yeah, going back to the question about the skill sets which
Are required.
are required.
So I think in terms of a skill set, one, of course, there's a whole gamut of training that is required for an art-based therapist, which includes, there are multiple options, either doing your master's in psychology and then getting a specialized training from a body which is recognized in art therapy, whether it's expressive art therapies or a specific form. So you're doing visual art, dance movement, whatever that might be. So getting a training, preferably getting a registration. So being registered with a body. Unfortunately, in India, we're getting there, but we don't have registered bodies just yet. We do have certification courses. We have, I think, maybe one diploma, which is there in Bombay. And things are now slowly moving and coming up in this field to get trained here. Otherwise, there are a multitude outside the country. In terms of an individual skill set, I would think creativity, curiosity, which everybody has. So it's a misconception that, oh, I'm not creative. We are all creative. We just lose that creativity because we've stopped using that part of our brain. We've stopped exercising, right? You could be a runner if you ran, if you put a little bit into it every day. Same thing with creativity. If you experience novelty, if you challenge yourself, if you create whatever, in whatever domain in your life, you will be a creative person, or your creativity will grow and be enhanced. So I think that's important for an art therapist. The understanding of the arts, which comes in your training. And barring that, everything else that comes with any other therapeutic, any other therapist would need a basic skill set of empathy, of, at least working towards being someone who's non-judgmental in that therapeutic setting, analytical abilities, the ability to listen. If I have 6 sessions in a day, I could potentially, as a talk therapist, be listening for 6 hours, right? Straight, or at least 5 hours straight. So I think just a couple of those things. And for me, curiosity is key. If as a therapist, you are not curious and you don't want to understand your client, you will never be able to support them.
You use the word curiosity, you use the word listening. So let me ask you this then. Is there one single practice you believe every therapist should adopt in their sessions? And do you think this practice actually can improve the overall therapeutic experience?
I think one thing that I got from my supervisors, which I had no idea was something you could do, is take your notes later. Do not take notes in the therapy session. Listen. You won't forget. There are things I remember about my clients, and I don't even have those notes anymore, from years ago. Because you have listened to them so intently, you have heard their whole story, and you've not been like, oh, okay, Santosh is saying this, let me quickly write it down. He's looking anxious, let me write down he's looking anxious. I'll give you an example I use is, when you're reading a book for leisure, you don't try and memorize everything, but you remember it. Someone asks you things about that book, you'll be able to narrate it, you'll be able to talk about it, because you were so involved in it. You genuinely were involved. But school, when you're studying to give an exam, it's so difficult. आपको सीखना पड़ता है, आपको रटना पड़ता है, आपको consciously याद दिलाना पड़ता है. Actually, if you were able to read a lot of your school texts like narratives.
It's interesting you say that. In fact, this is leading me to a question which I would have ideally asked you in our final segment, but I'm asking you this question. Do you write a note to yourself as a part of your process?
In art therapy, it's called reflective art.
Okay. But do you do that yourself?
Yes. So reflective art is essentially, so when you're in supervision, so I'm also a supervisor, an art therapy supervisor, not for my team, but internationally I have the degree to be able to now supervise other therapists who are in the process. One of the things we asked our supervisees to do is bring in reflective art. So post a session, whether it was a session that felt really good to you or a challenging session, you create a piece of art which is response art, your response to what you experienced. And that comes in as part of, so they will of course do a clinical case presentation, talk about the techniques utilized where they were challenged, but the reflective or the response art will be part of it, because that helps you identify transference, counter transference, how you are feeling. And if I simplify that, how maybe you haven't dealt with something in your life that might come up, something you are feeling because the client is bringing a relationship into the session that mirrors something outside for them. And it allows you to reflect at various levels. So that is a practice which I learned about only through art therapy. And I think, again, fantastic tool, well-researched, very, very powerful, almost like writing a note to yourself about certain sessions. And of course, we do have notes that we also take, but response art is a very novel tool.
Okay. Do you think individuals can support the mission of Express Art Therapy in their own communities?
Yes.
Mhm.
I think
And what actions could they take that can make the difference?
starting point, first dive into your own creativity.
Hmm.
Recognize that creativity is healing for all of us. It is important for our brain. It will help you in your careers, in your academic spaces, in what hopefully should be more important than all that, which is finding balance, joy, being able to deal with challenges in your life. When we were younger, you'll hear stories about grandparents and parents playing, falling off trees, breaking fruit, struggling to find a way up that tree. And play was a part of problem solving, was emotional management. Today, there aren't those spaces. Everything is structured, we're attempting to make everything mathematical almost. The problem with that is not everything works out in a 2+2 format. And we've got a generation of people who are struggling to problem solve, to process their emotions, who feel like if this doesn't happen, then there is nothing. If I don't get a 99%, life is over. And to be able to remember that there are many options. You can climb this tree from here and here and here also. And if you fall down and you can't climb this tree, can you climb another tree? That's what art therapy and creativity brings back into the foray. So, first step, find yours, rediscover it, start talking in that language, consciously, intentionally take time out for your mental health and for your creativity. Then you will be able to talk about it. You will be engaging your families in it, whether it's game night, whether it's cooking together, whether it's, sometimes I'll do it with my paint a wall in our house with my daughter, or jump in the balcony because pani gir gaya, so we were just jumping, or planting something new and watching it grow. Her feeling frustrated that where is it? The next day, where's the tomato? Tomato nahi aaya. It'll take a month. Now that the leaves have sprouted, she's like, oh, leaves came. Then how much time? How much time will it take? Learning patience. Learning everything doesn't come tomorrow. But not because mother is lecturing her saying, beta, patience. Because you truly learn patience when you wait for a seed to grow into a plant to bear fruit. And that's what creativity does.
And you're also in the process learning yourself too, right?
For me, 100%.
Awesome. So yeah, although I said the last question of this segment was the earlier one, but this was truly the last segment. And with that, we move into our next segment and we call it What's Brewing.
Ooh.
And so we talk about what's the new thing which is happening in the space. So my first question on that in this segment is, what role do you think technology can play in enhancing express art therapy? And if you can shed some light on specific tools or platforms that you find particularly useful.
So again, very super question, because now about 60% of my work is online. Virtual art therapy. And this shift happened in COVID, something which was not written about, not talked about, because no one had to do it, no one did it. And a lot of the benefits of art therapy were that you were touch and feel, you were in a session, you were sharing space. COVID happened and we went online like everybody else. And we had to figure out how to take art therapy online. Two spaces where the online world can really aid in art therapy. One, looking at adding another medium for a generation that lives online. So you've also got exposure to now. I started out with the Zoom whiteboard and I actually contributed to a book then we wrote on virtual art therapy with the space that I was teaching in, and which is the Canadian International Institute of Art Therapy. And that has people who've talked about, I talked about the Zoom whiteboard and using different kinds of online creation of art with the client. Somebody actually delved into AI and art therapy, and what that would look like if you could experience it, through virtual reality.
That is my that's a lead up question, is AI and art therapy.
I can
But-
share the book with you.
Okay.
And maybe the person's contact who contributed to that part of it.
But I don't know, maybe it's the old school in me. For me, when it comes to art therapy, when it comes to creativity, I'm not sure how much of that can be done online. So if you can break that
A
myth.
fair amount.
Mhm.
Again, not ideal,
Hmm.
but for some people, I found, for example, a client I worked with who was all of 11 and then for various reasons was in therapy for, about 3 years, that we were doing it in person initially and then COVID hit, so we had to switch. Suddenly, this client's range of being able to express themselves, because they were so adept at utilizing different online tools to
Mhm.
be able to do digital art, that their ability to express, to interlay. And one of the things I talked about was also that in what you do in art therapies, you can't delete.
Hmm.
Up, you've drawn that line or that pattern, now you can draw over it, and then you create an image. What I learned in the virtual space was to show the impact of hitting. This client created one thing, then did undo, 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 and the arrows went back, and then redo, 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 redo. And even just that was almost like movement therapy. And it is a different experience to create another option in the spectrum of visual art mediums that we can use, is adding the visual, is adding digital art, which some people actually lean more to. So I think that gave me a new tool. The other thing it gave me was stepping into people's houses and homes, which is something actually otherwise normally would never do. But here I was in their space. So I had people being able to take me to spaces, show me things of value, symbols that meant something to them.
And
That-
that's sacrosanct for them because it's their personal space.
And in art therapy, symbols are very powerful. Metaphors are very powerful.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
part of what we utilize.
Yeah.
So that was powerful. The other thing I lent into, or that allowed me to lean into, was cultural things we use. So, I was working with a client who was struggling in the marriage, and, there was violence, and COVID brought a lot of that up as well, who actually used the only mediums that were available, which was sindoor, which was nail polish paint, marker that was lying, and printer paper. And then we started using haldi, lal mirch. We started using coffee, dregs. And it was so powerful because now you were using materials that meant something themselves.
Hmm.
What did the chilies mean? Not just that I wanted to use red. Using that sindoor, what did that mean? Why was it used where it was used? And that allowed for an additional layer of importance. It's different from using red paint to commemorate what had happened versus the
Aditi,
actual thing.
Aditi, I'm not allowed to share this, but I don't know how it happened because growing up, one of my very close classmate, um, she went through situations which I dread no one ever goes through uh, in her own home.
Mm.
I mean, and so many years later, I think it was 2013 or 14 in Atlanta. I was at the Emory School, and one of the professors out there, philosophy professor, was sharing a story with me about his friend's kid um, drawing home, but always keeping the nanny out of the family. When and I don't know what happened, but I probably picked it up, and then whatever had to happen happened, and the kid went through years of counseling before the kid could actually become normal in the first place. And the reason why I brought this up is I just realized that art is such a powerful form, and I think although I got into technology and computers when I was 14 and a half or 15. Um, and I'm a big believer in technology, but I somehow feel that I'm not sure the kid would have been able to express what the kid expressed through a virtual medium. That personal interactions was very important.
Absolutely. I mean, I would pick being in person any day. But I also
Are there some
realized
platforms which
with
really helps? I mean, which you use when it comes to
online,
technology? Yeah.
I used a lot of the Zoom whiteboard. Then some of my clients themselves brought in different digital art medium tools that they enjoyed utilizing. So it's really what the person can express with best that works. Otherwise, what we also figured was virtually you can still create on paper and you can still create without using a virtual medium, but still being there virtually. So it's like doing an art therapy session with your things, with your symbols, personal items, not creating online, but it's still being a virtual session. So I think that has also dynamically changed how art therapy is working now.
I think during the course of our conversation, we discussed this earlier, where when I shared with you that mental health and getting to know oneself, one's own mental wellness, should be a part of corporate induction programs, right? So this is an interesting questions which came in from my associate producer. One of the questions I feel should come in, and I think we've discussed this in our earlier podcast too, but express arts being essential in a school curriculum, because I think it's important. If yes, how do we do that?
It is important, which is why it's there. I just think perhaps the quantum of it is not enough.
Do you have some real life experiences to share? Do you have it being a part of the curriculum? Are there
in
any,
schools?
Yeah,
I mean, well, curriculum in the sense that you'll have
a separate class or
correct. You will have sports. You will have the creative arts as different classes. Whether it's visual art or painting, you'll have an option. But one thing I experienced from my setup, and I think it's still the same in schools, is that choose one. The creative arts mein aapko and then the issue is that it's not just art for experience; it's art for proficiency because it's in a school setup. So what I would change would be that the goal doesn't always have to be that someone has to get good at something or that they're only allowed into it if they're good at it. Versus saying we're growing the skill level in that. Of course, school is meant to develop skills. But also if someone enjoys an art form, even if they're not at an A++ level in that art form, why are we to take that away? Why can't I play a sport, love it, but not be, the most proficient person in the sport? That sport is teaching me teamwork. It's teaching me problem solving. It's teaching me about my strength, my resilience, my endurance. I feel better. Same thing with the arts. If I'm not proficient, but I enjoy expressing myself, I feel proud of the outcome of it. I feel supported. I enjoy the dopamine boost that the color gives me. I'm able to communicate through it. Why should I have the perfect lines? I'm not saying send me for an art competition. So I also feel like, and you look inherently at the arts, that's how they've evolved over time. No? Picasso was looked at some stage like, what is he doing? What is this? What is he creating? How dynamically that changed in the world. Same thing with dance and movement. It's evolved. Every time someone needed more expression, it moved from ballet to modern dance, which was far more expressive, far less rigid and stuck, because people suddenly were like, we're trapped. This is not expressive enough. And that became now the A+ form.
True.
So it just...
True. Normally, the segment on what's brewing is slightly longer one, but when it comes to express art, I will ask these questions with caution. So I would say the final question, because it's a short segment to me, future projects at your end, globally, if there are some exciting projects which are happening, which could probably change the course of express art therapy, and are there innovations happening around the therapy itself? So 3-part question: future projects which you are involved in, future projects which are happening globally, and innovations out there. And do you think it can help shape the future of express art therapy?
Okay. Future projects that I'm looking at include looking at new, hopefully, horizons of more training spaces in the country around the expressive arts, whether it's looking at courses, getting affiliated to universities, but really growing good training spaces. We teach one certificate course as of now, but really growing that into something where we can become licensing bodies, have those opportunities here. I think that would be a future project whether it's dream pipeline and part in conversation, but that's something. I think also in terms of looking at more community outreach, more group-based therapeutic interventions is something that I would want to look at in terms of expansion. The second question was?
So the second part of the question was special projects globally. And the third part of that question was, are there specific innovations happening around that can shape express art therapy?
So I think globally and in terms of innovations, the couple of spaces now that we're diving into, one is enhancing and building on the neuro component of the expressive arts and really getting into understanding the impact that it's having at a. So even looking at fMRIs and really looking at mapping the impact of art therapy creativity on the brain, and therefore on us, on the person. Second is looking at eco-art therapy, which is looking at the ecological balance, utilizing resources that exist, looking at connecting back to that natural space is another space that's really, really coming up. Also, this goes back to personal projects, is also looking at talking about art therapy in a cultural context. Very often, it's
Interesting.
not part of our training because you're not it's removed. It's a very, like all psychology, there's a largely Western bend to it. So looking at cultural art therapy, and the last is the virtual. So I think coming back to globally, there is definitely like a move everywhere else into exploring. I don't know where it'll go. I'm mildly apprehensive, but of looking at mental health, art therapy, AI, the virtual world, and what that could look like if it came in. So that's also something that's happening on the global front.
In fact, it's interesting you use the word cultural because in our country, if you actually, trace back to the earliest times, all of these were actually happening in many forms and shape, right? Yeah, and I think I'm really looking forward to those, especially from a cultural standpoint. Uh, I think of growing up in a joint family, for me, all of the things you just said uh, happen naturally and organically uh, in terms of expression, because there was always one person or the other whom you can rely on, talk to. And so I think, yeah, it's truly not a Western concept as it is made out to be. Innovations, Aditi, which is happening in the space.
The same thing that I mentioned. At least I'm not aware, but looking at AI and art therapy, looking at the neuroscience component of art therapy, a lot of these areas, there is more exploration, more
Yeah, I think
innovation.
the neuroscience part seems really, really promising.
It is. I think it's very exciting to really be able to map things people have been talking about for generations now, but to be able to see, what's happening in the brain, is very, very powerful. So I think that's exciting because that then allows for us to break into a lot more places, talk with a lot more evidence, plan better in terms of goal development and actually working with a client. So I think it's that is really changing what's happening. It's not that the activity base or the that might not be changing, but it's just there's so much evolution happening in the neuroscience space now.
All right, Aditi, we come to the final segment, rapid fire questions. This or that, painting or sculpting, which medium do you find more therapeutic for your clients?
Painting, but it varies from person to person. But I've used painting a lot more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which form of expressive arts therapy do you think resonates more deeply with individuals?
Again, this is a tough one because it depends really on the individual and their affinity to the medium. So if you ask me what resonates with me the most is visual art, which includes painting, which includes sculpting, anything tactile. So even visual art, like when I can get in with my hands. But for another, it might be music, for someone else, movement. So
Okay,
varies.
cool. Hospitals or community centers, where do you see the most profound impact of art therapy?
Because I work in a hospital, I think most definitely hospitals, because right now there is a huge dearth in hospitals of the work and the potential impact it can have across the board.
How about community centers? Do we have enough of them here?
I don't think so particularly, but hospitals are also spaces where people come in for treatment, and doing art therapy in a setup where you have people who are there, who need the support, who need the help is fantastic. Community centers, I think there are not as many as they perhaps need to be.
Need to be.
And there would be a lot more well-being work happening in a community center versus clinical work. So it would, there are two spaces, and maybe I can dive back into it, but art as therapy and art psychotherapy. And of course, they align and they're not independent, but art as therapy would be something which comes into a community center space, which is therapeutic art, creating and feeling good and emoting onto paper or creating a sculpture, and that outcome of whatever you've created in the process that you've created it with being enough to make you feel a certain way, versus art psychotherapy, which is where you'll come in with a stressor, or you'll be coming in with a mental health diagnosis and or a physical health diagnosis, and there a clinically trained person would step in to work with you, where art is utilized for expression, for processing, but to a goal of building insight and then recovery and healing. So there would be far more steps involved. The process would matter far more than the outcome. So there's a slight difference there. My sense is that in community centers, the therapeutic art space would be far stronger, while in a clinical setup or a hospital setup, there will be a lot more art-based psychotherapy that will be going on.
I get it. My friend, she works for the Special Victims Unit in New York, with the police department. So they have these especially for victims of sexual harassment. And she always tells me that sometimes being in a familiar environment allows them to express themselves a lot more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. Personal growth or collective healing? Which outcome do you prioritize in your therapeutic practice?
Depends on if I have a person or a collective. But usually a large part of the work is with individuals in a in an outpatient setup. But if the community is not healing or the collective is not growing, which is where a lot of the preventive work comes in. So I've worked with schools, I've worked with NGOs, with corporate organizations on well-being work using the arts, because if the system continues to stay broken, then the individual growth after a point will continuously be stunted, and so that's
Art for relaxation or self-discovery?
depends on what you need.
Okay. I'm getting all balanced answers from all my guests now. Group therapy or individual sessions?
I actually really enjoy working with groups. I think there's a strong impact. I think we don't have enough of them. We don't have enough spaces for group work. I get to do it once, maybe twice a year, versus, let's say, 6 sessions a day when you're looking at individual work. So, but I think group work is extremely powerful. We just don't have, a lot of groups don't come in, a lot of groups don't come together and sustain. That's not something I think we've been able to build as much as we can here.
Tell me something. I'm trying to figure this out. Are parents now becoming more receptive to art therapies for their kids?
Absolutely. I think adults are becoming more receptive to art therapy for themselves.
I can understand
That
because they are
is-
a lot more grown up.
No, that's the huge change. In fact, it's interesting that you asked that a lot of parents were more receptive to art therapy for children from when I started, which is 12 years ago. But because it's the arts, so because there's art, you're like, okay, this is not therapy. This is, in their mind, it would feel like this is okay. This we can take our child for. This doesn't mean usually what going to a counselor means. So it was actually a much more well-received form of treatment for children by parents. So when a school would recommend them to come in. But adults would always struggle coming in for themselves because it didn't make sense, right? I think too long ago, most of us traded in our paintbrushes and our sketch pens for keyboards and desks. And I think the fact that you come into a space where the arts are coming back and are being used and it's creative, there's a lot of defenses that come up to diving in for an adult because we think too much.
And it's also because of the preconceived notions we have about certain things.
Yes.
I think one of the other reason was I was having a discussion yesterday while preparing for this. I realized that, um, you know, I think arts and humanities
Hmm.
as a subject is being, we are being more receptive towards that, right? With one of
Now.
my guests yesterday, he was telling me his back in the day it was always engineering, medical, and
Hmm.
blah blah blah, and it's like now it's now becoming a part of it. So maybe that also is adding to it. I don't know.
Because we need it. You know, suddenly the world, I feel like when you look at all the waves of mental health and all the shifts across the generations, they come in because something is needed.
Hmm.
You know, there's a void.
Correct.
And suddenly you realize humanity can't go on with just this form of support. And I think that's happening. That we are in a space where we are running too fast. We are thinking. So there's a lot of cognition, metacognition, and people are burning out, people are exhausted, people aren't able to step back and look at what makes them truly feel balanced, but are rushing towards some happiness which never comes because you achieve one thing and then what makes you happy. And we've lost what was our anchor, which is stories, art, music. That is what was part of growing up for generations, and we have painted over it, and like I said, traded in, you know, our creative selves for being put in boxes. And
Mhm.
that has led to a lot of, I feel like, just community level distress and challenges in basics of problem solving.
Hmm.
In, you know, we're not able to do that anymore because we've stopped playing.
Awesome. So Aditi, we move to the next segment within the rapid fire, fun and interactive segment. If you could choose any famous artist to collaborate with for a therapy session, who would it be and why? What unique perspective would they bring?
That's a tough one. That's a, oh my God. So, artist, as in like
Could be any form of art.
anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Painter, musician, writer.
The first person that comes to mind is, I think, because of constant exposure with it being my child's current favorite artist, is Katy Perry or someone like that.
Mhm.
Because one, it's very interesting. I've now got to hear some of the words of some of the songs, which are very powerful around, you
Mhm.
know, becoming who you want to become, and that you're capable of much more. And I think they're empowering, which is nice. The other thing I would think is an artist of that level to collaborate with would give maximum outreach. So I
Mhm.
feel like in mental health right now, collaborating with artists that have outreach across the board is so important because we need to talk more about it.
Mhm.
But that's just also, I think, because it's playing in my house all the time right now. The other artist that, you know, when we're talking about houses, reminding me of my childhood is Paresh Maiti,
Mhm.
who
Oh, I love.
stunning. And my aunt bought a painting from him
Mhm.
when no one knew him. I don't know, I must have been 10.
Mhm.
So that's 20 something years ago,
Mhm.
right? And it was just stunning. And it was so expressive. And it was and it was also at a time in my life where I got kicked out of art class in school. And I thought art had to be a certain way. You know, you had to be perfect and precise. And I saw this and it felt like something that I resonated with. It felt real. It was just a field of yellow and a river flowing through it.
Mhm.
Nothing.
He channelizes your inner self so much. We've got paintings of his because my mom is a huge fan.
Yeah.
So.
And now I went to art fair and he's so famous and so
Yeah.
expensive and impossible to get. And that actually, that piece of art made me feel like I could create what I felt like. And so I think that was an artist growing up for me that was very powerful. Even though he didn't necessarily talk about mental health or write lyrics around, you know, I think these two would be just different parts of, yeah, just artists who I think for different reasons would be worth collaborating with.
Super. What's the most unexpected positive outcome you've witnessed from an art therapy session? How did it change your view on the power of creative therapy?
I worked with somebody
Mhm.
who was in their mid 30s many, many years ago, and was a client that you would not think would come into art therapy, because it didn't fit on the surface what people would come in for, right? So on a surface level, people will refer clients to us for looking at trauma work, if that's been identified, children, which comes easy to them, people struggling with anxiety. So these are the clinical spaces where someone will come in. This person gave me a phone call and said, I'm struggling to work on my Excel sheet. And this is my profession. This is what I do. This is all the things I'm running. And I'm hitting a roadblock because my work is Excel. My life is Excel. And I can't do it. So I said, okay. I said, I just wanted to let you know I'm trained in cognitive work, but I'm also an art therapist. So he said, no, I'm calling you because you're an art therapist. And this is 6-7 years ago when no one called me because I was an art therapist. And he said, I want art therapy because I've tried everything else. What can you do for me?
Okay.
And I said, why don't you come in? And anyway, we had multiple sessions, and it was very, very unexpected because it didn't follow how one would usually start an art therapy session where you'd give a couple of activities. I felt like I was being tested and pushed. And that revealed a lot of what this client had been through, significant loss, trauma. But that only came up in the 4th session. And to use with a 35-plus-year-old at that time, building blocks where we developed an Excel sheet in front of ourselves and understood that it wasn't necessarily that was just a symptom. And the fact that it was effective as we progressed through about 7 months of therapy, for me, that was the most spectacular outcome, is to see that art therapy helps you break past your defenses, that age is not a bar. I think it was a great reminder that gender, choice, none of these things are bars to someone coming in and finding healing, building insight, being able to create a safe space where maybe language didn't give that safe space for that person, was very, very powerful. And I think for me, that was a shifting point in my career, is that realizing that I need to be art first, which is what a supervisor of mine once told me. That don't play into the talk therapy space just because it's a safe space and others know it and you've trained in it all your life. But if you don't go art first, why will your client go art first? So I think it was very, very powerful for me, that client of mine.
I just want to ask you this question. My team will hate me for that because I go off script most of the times. But this is has any client or any situation broken you down to a point where you've needed therapy yourself?
Especially at the beginning, actually. So when I was in training and I was studying in Mumbai, and luckily we had a small class group of 17 of us, and we had great supervision. But I was working in care and protection homes, in very, very small places in the extremities of Bombay, and it was very difficult to work in setups where mental health was secondary, and I also felt it was secondary because I wanted to help those kids. And I remember going to my supervisor once and saying, okay, I want to put this child in like my backpack and hide her and get her out of there. And I think it was one of the second settings that I worked in. And I would come back and cry for hours saying, hum kar kya rahe? Why am I doing artwork and what am I trying to do? I need to help them. And she said, yes. And there are people working on helping them. So you decide what career you choose. And then she helped me track over 6 months. And I still have those notes with me because it was, I thought, vital reminder for myself that what you contribute to helping someone build resilience in crisis settings or in challenging spaces and how you can support them is transformative. I think it's helped me decide that I did want to do this no matter what.
Okay.
But it did personally push me to a place where a lot of my traumas came up, a lot of my struggles or memories started coming to the surface, because I think all of our struggles, a large part of them are centered in helplessness or hopelessness for whatever we've gone through. And I think that was a stark reminder of all of those things, and a great reminder that as therapists, we need to work on our struggles. We need to be aware that they can be triggered at different points, and that it's important for us to seek help, support, supervision, therapy, whatever you need at the time.
I really wanted to ask you this because
Hmm.
I know what you go through. We all go through that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, if you could implement express arts therapy in any unconventional setting, where would it be and why? And how do you think it would benefit the individuals there?
Unconventional, conventional क्या है? What is conventional?
Maybe your clinic or in a hospital environment.
Okay.
And for me, unconventional could be anything. It could be maybe you're just having a conversation with someone at a coffee shop, or it could be anywhere, right? So,
Hmm. Fair. So I'll tell you what. My sense is that un- it's hard because for me, I'll tell you the conventional settings right now, or where we're working, where they might not be conventional necessary, is community spaces, is schools where we do preventive work, is college, is now what I would have thought at some point was unconventional, is corporates, massive corporates or corporate organizations that now are finally, perhaps post COVID, reaching out saying, we want you to come in and do art with these people sitting on desks.
all right, let's say the unconventional setting could be just you and me talking on this podcast, and you just realize you need to have a conversation around it.
Mhm.
So that could be unconventional. It could be anywhere, I
No,
feel.
but I'm saying I think corporates were the unconventional setting that was
Mhm.
broken into, that was much needed.
Mhm.
And we're still not there yet, getting to a place where you realize the benefits of working with groups that are consistently feeling burnt out
Mm.
or struggling with problem solving, not being productive, not being able to create, um, is a huge challenge because your workforce, which has now gone in large numbers into these spaces, is struggling and is getting stuck. So that would be one. While the other conventional spaces that we do work and it's extremely impactful is schools, is all of these spaces. The one more idea came. Sorry, I'm unilaterally giving you a lecture now. But an art, um, an art space. One would think artists don't need art therapy, or it would be like we are already creating and emoting and expressing. But I find that when I have clients who are artists or musicians or creators in some way, they actually struggle with that medium in art therapy because it's you want to be good, so helping them deconstruct being proficient at it versus coming backwards and saying, how do I be and express myself? That has been powerful and actually challenging. So maybe I'd go to a museum, or I'd go to a exhibition space and hold
To
sessions
me, a
there.
museum is the perfect and the most unconventional space you can think of. Cool. What's your favorite piece of art that you've created in a therapy session, and what makes it so special to you?
I don't think there's a specific one.
Okay. Anything that comes to your mind?
There's just as you said it came to my mind. There was in training, in fact, I created a piece which was using clay, and the person who was training us, and in art therapy, part of the training is also the process of you actually experiencing it and going through the process yourself. So it was actually therapeutic for me, where they got us to close our eyes and hold a piece of clay in our hands and mold. And for 3 minutes, this person was guiding us through saying, okay, mold whatever feels right, whatever it's becoming. And initially, when it started, I remember my brain saying, what is this? Like, what's going to happen? What will the outcome be? And there's a flow state which you hit, and artists will resonate. And there's a psychologist who's talked about flow extensively. But when you are so absorbed that you're not necessarily consciously, it's an optimal state of functioning, which happens very often in the arts. And I remember creating, and then after a point, I didn't know what I was creating, and it finished, and it looked like a twisted, odd, semi jagged mountain.
Hmm.
But the reflection that came from it after,
Hmm.
and how I felt after finishing the process, and uh, was very revealing of what I was feeling, which I wasn't aware of when we started. I just looked at it critically as an activity. So I think, as you said it, that really struck me.
If you could use any art form that's currently less explored in therapy, what would it be and why? How do you think it could benefit your clients?
Hmm. So when you say it's like one of those things. When I tell you don't look behind you, there's a tree, you'll feel like looking. So when you
Yes.
say less explored, only the ones that are explored are coming into my head. But one of the things that comes to mind and is now coming up is eco art therapy, where nature is essentially your medium. And that is a beyond powerful space, which I know here is far less explored.
Mhm.
And we
Like
need to go back to it.
like what could be
Like,
bird watching? Bird watching?
it could be, but it's more not just bird watching. It would be being able to have that. So again, bird watching would, let's say, be like art as therapy, which is it's just therapeutic for me to do or engage with. Eco art therapy talks about going back and using natural mediums to create. So I might create a mandala in the sand. I might build something out of leaves and flowers and plants that have fallen. And the story and symbols. I remember doing this, taking a therapeutic group to the deer park in Delhi. We still have some green spaces here, and finding like a broken coconut and a patthar, and what came of using those mediums, because we naturally, again, this is where we live, this is our environment, these are our stories, was very powerful, also ecologically sound. We weren't wasting mediums, we didn't have to reuse, we used stones and sticks. And so I think that, and we stepped out, which, like, you asked bird watching, is we realize we sit in boxes, we also do therapy in safe spaces in rooms, and there's a reason for that, and it's very important. But we also realize now, slowly the need for going back into nature, and why people are more anxious in cities or in structures that are built to reduce open space. When you go to a sanctuary or a forest or a mountain or an ocean, a lot of times you'll reach and you'll be like, literally, that's what spaces and nature do for us. But
And I want to really share this story of my friend Emma. She works with the Special Victims Unit as an external consulting. She's also a consultant on the TV show, Law and Order SVU. She has a daughter. She's a single mom. And she says there are times when she has to deal with victims it's very, very hard to deal with them. But she says, my biggest challenge is not with the victims of sexual harassment, but it's rather the cops who actually have to go through this process. So she also gets affected. And she says, the best form of deconstruction is when I come back home and my 4-year-old daughter deconstructs things for me in a way which is so simple. It's like, she's the person who taught me this. She said, when you're walking down the streets, any street, and you look at a stranger and you smile, she says 99% of the time the person will smile back. When you walk down the street and you keep a straight face, they'll give a straight face back. And she says that's what life is, as simple as you make it to be, as complex as you make it to be. And I don't know why this came to my mind, because when she says that I deconstruct a lot of my things through the eyes of, or through the way my daughter conducts herself. And I thought this is also, when I looked at the question, I said, wow, this could be a really unconventional form of, a therapy, because
it's just what we've lost, right? Children are so close to the creative,
yes,
to the honest,
yeah,
to just their emotions. They don't put on fronts. We've ruined that with due course,
yeah,
but that's it. Their view of the world can teach us so
so many
much.
things. I mean, it's just amazing. Okay, what's the most memorable feedback you've received from a client after an art therapy session? And did it, for me, what's more important is, did it change the way you can do your practice because of that? I mean, I know you constantly learn from every client, every experience, but has anything of happened where you feel, you know what, this has given me a new perspective?
I'm not going to give the feedback I got, but
Yeah.
I'll tell you what felt like that first moment of feedback. Finally, one answers come rapidly. But it was a couple that I worked with, one of the first couples I worked with, and did movement therapy with, in a small hospital room with a hospital bed and a sink, and the least conducive space for movement therapy work, technically. And we did 6 months of work, and we did a lot of movement work in the process. And I'll give you the image. They used to come into that room, sitting, pulling their chairs away from each other, looking at me, not talking to each other, only talking through me. And the moment I remember them coming in, about 5.5 months later, where I had left the chairs apart and they dragged them without thinking, sat next to each other, laughed. It was almost like they were flirting again and walked out holding hands. And then I did get like feedback a couple of months later as well, which was, I thought was very validating. But just them holding hands and walking out that day, I was like, wow. Everything I learned about a movement therapy room needing to be, a certain way, this much space, this much light, I was like, we just managed to pull this off in a tiny chamber where you can barely move. And I thought it was very powerful reminder that we will have different settings to work with. The expressive arts can be utilized in multiple ways if you just understand what your goal is. You're trained in clinically knowing how to build what you're doing with your client, and you can do it in
Wow.
various spaces.
I
Yeah.
process Aditi things very visually. And as you were sharing this, I could just visualize two people walking out. Oh my God. If you had a superpower to solve one mental health issue instantly, what would it be and why? And how would this change the landscape of mental health care?
Change one mental health issue. I think I'm going to flip it and say, okay, well, technically, it's not a mental health issue, it's not a diagnosis, but I think it is the core of many, which is hopelessness. I think when we lose hope, whether it's manifesting as anxiety, whether we've experienced trauma, whether I'm being bullied in school, whether I'm struggling with my relationship with my partner, hope is what makes us want to work on ourselves. Hope is what drives resilience in unimaginable circumstances, how people survive. So I would just magically give people hope so that they have every chance at working through whatever struggle, whatever diagnosis, to a place where they can heal. I think so. Hopelessness is what I would erase if that could
I'll
happen.
try to answer from my perspective because you are probably one of the only guests I can do this with, where I feel comfortable. If I had a superpower, especially when it comes to mental health, I wish I could simply, like a magic wand, remove the idea of not normalizing certain things. And if you have a mental health issue, it I think everybody has that. And I wish people start realizing this is not anything abnormal. It's just, I wish we could do that.
It's getting better.
Yeah, it is. And it's a shame that it took a pandemic
To do
you know
it.
yeah.
Absolutely.
What was your aha moment that led you to focus on expressive arts therapy? And I know it's shaped your career in a very different way. So today, what was that aha moment?
Aha moment was I was doing my master's. No one talked about art therapy. I had never heard of it. Thankfully, one lovely professor that we had was interested at that point, and she did a 1 day, visual art was brought in a very small way. Then our college also at that point tied up with an organization that was working with survivors of sexual abuse and trafficking in Kolkata, who came down to Bombay and did a a 1 day movement therapy workshop with us. We didn't speak the same language as most of the trainers, and it broke me. And it was transformative. I didn't know I could feel those things. I didn't know I was carrying things. I thought I had dealt with everything, sorted it out. I knew about myself, and oh my God, the whole concept of mind, body, symbolism, and why it's so integral to our healing, just perhaps it shouldn't have happened all in 1 day. But when you said aha moment, I was like, aha, to an extent where then I emailed that person for 6 months. Where can I train? Where can I train? Can I do a training course? Where do I study this? How do I get to? Can I intern with you? I was like this persistent person pushing her. And finally, she gave me a name saying, okay, in Delhi, you can go to this person. We don't teach. Bas, that day changed my life. That one workshop.
So I have to share this with you. When Gitika ma'am told me that you are coming on the show, Express Art Therapy, because I'd heard about it in the US, I was very surprised to know that it happens. And now, as I read on, I realize that it's like it's a process which is happening
Yes.
across the country, I guess,
Yeah.
and that's really really wonderful. Aditi, if I were to describe your mission in 3 words, and how do these words guide your daily works?
My mission. I think it's as much basically outreach. My
Okay.
hope, because this goes beyond the one session that I will do with how many ever people that I cross paths with. And I really think my mission is that mental health is something we respect, we build into all our spaces,
Mm-hmm.
interpersonal, doesn't matter where it stands, that we become a kinder people
Mm-hmm.
in just in life, and that people aren't scared. And I think that comes back to what you said, normalizing mental health,
Mm-hmm.
um, to talk about why they're struggling, where they're struggling, and the recipient of that conversation actually listens and is okay to give them what they need. For which I think the mission is talk about mental health, talk about mental health as much as you can, be as relatable, be available to people who want to grow in this space, because you are not it. You know, we'll be gone, we'll be nothing at some point, but hopefully generations beyond
Mm.
us will exist. And like you said, it took a pandemic for mental health to become something people are now
Mm.
less scared to talk
Mm.
about, to access. I hope it doesn't take more things like that for us
Oh yeah,
to build on
absolutely.
this.
Yeah, yeah. True, true. And it's funny because the idea of Between Us started last year, but the idea was there in my mind for almost 3 years. And in 2020, when everything closed down, I just ordered in a mic for me, and I started a solo podcast called The Meeting Minds. I remember 31st of March 2020 when the lockdown was just. And so I remember my mom asking me, "What are you going to talk about?" And I said, "I want to talk about mental health because I know if this goes on for long, it'll be the single biggest issue." And while it made me happy that it turned out to be that, it also made me sad that we needed a pandemic of this nature to actually talk about something that, which should be. I feel that, when you talk about mental health and you talk about corporates now having it, I think it should be a part of the induction program itself, the entire process. And it should be a continuous process.
Yeah.
But we don't realize what we go through,
No,
until it kind of
absolutely.
just boomerangs on us.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, I was just thinking also, it's come up for people in urban settings, and
Yeah.
look at the larger part of our population that we still are struggling to reach out to. And I think that's part of, I mean, when we say the community will shift, or
Yeah.
or there will be actual change, it will be outreach to actually the whole system or the larger population.
You know something, Aditi? Because I grew up kind of a joint family because we used to have cousins over for vacations. I have realized one very important thing. I think growing up in a bigger family, I think you will always find someone to talk to. And I think especially in the rural areas, when I was doing my undergrad in economics, I had the opportunity to do research, um, internships during my first second year, and we traveled to villages in India, and I've realized they have had more open conversations than we have in cities.
Absolutely. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But and वही है ना, that engagement is so important. You
Yeah.
were talking about building networks,
Yes.
in your space that you're working in. I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
We need to build more networks. We need to talk to more people. We need to get out of our comfort zones and
Yeah,
boxes.
yeah, yeah. Everything. I mean, it may not be that big of a deal, but for me personally, it's a big of a deal moving out from Mumbai to a new city,
Mm.
and because everything is set for me there. Uh, it's just, and I feel that unless we keep doing that, I never knew that this would be a part of a full time career for me. But it just organically became because I realized that, wow, the more conversations I have, the more I realize that how much less I knew about things around me. It's just, isn't it?
This is my entire profession.
Yeah, there you go. All right. The final question in our fun and interactive session. How do you relax and connect with your creativity in your free time? And does it ever influence your work?
Oh, always. I
Mhm,
mean, I think initially it was the art forms that I was used to, or that I
mhm,
loved, or that I knew I loved.
mhm,
So whether it was painting, whether it was foraging and collaging, music has always been a very safe space for me.
mhm.
Um,
How?
Listening to me, it's they're called. I mean, now that I know the theory of it, also it's called sound boundaries.
Mhm.
That actually music can hold space for us.
Okay.
So it can make us feel safe. It can, let's say I go back and I listen to something that I listen to on a regular basis to calm me down. There's a neurological pathway that will form that every time that song even starts, doesn't matter the state I'm in, my heart rate will go back to resting and will take me back. It's the same neural pathway that kind of gets woken up, that takes me back there. So we build it's the same as a smell memory of something from your childhood. It'll suddenly remind you of something you haven't thought about in years. It's the same as a negative trigger that you've gone through. We were talking about assault or abuse, and you see something that reminds you of it, and it just you suddenly feel your heart rate escalate. To someone else it's just a statue of a whatever spaceman. So I think somewhere that works very well for me. The somatic connection to sound
Mhm.
and smell are very powerful. But the new challenge, which I hated with all my heart for most of my life, which I've only started in the last couple of years, has been to cook. An art form that I really did not
Oh, I
like,
could
but
not agree more.
that's been my new
Yeah,
interest area in the
like
arts.
it's funny because when somebody would say living in cities, and there's this, like labeling, oh, if a man is cooking, it could be some pasta or something like that. But for me, therapy is when I really make the whole 3-4 course meal.
I'm
Two, three
not there yet.
sabzis, dal, roti. I can make everything, and that just gives me peace and
Yeah.
happiness. My associate producer, Samyak. So there are times when I'm just doing something, and I would just say, Samyak, just play something. And now I realize, like just before this podcast, we were sitting in a coffee shop, and he just looked at me and he realized I'm in that space. Listen to this. Maybe that sound boundary. Who knows? For me, the smell of the soil when the first raindrops come, and sometimes I just close my eyes and just smell it visually, and I feel positive about the whole thing.
So I'm not digressing really, but so one of the things, for example, I love to do in sessions with clients as well, because it is something that works really well, is visualization.
Mm.
So now I might not be able to give you the smell of rain on soil, but I might be able to take you there in some ways. The more I understand you and get to know you, and even that is transformative in the art therapy process. So taking you through a space of visualization where I'll say things like, feel the grass, on your toes, and you can smell the rain and hear the rustling of the winds, and it just takes you there. And
Mm.
maybe once the person is feeling, depending on again the goal, whatever you're creating there, you can then do artwork. Say, what
Mm.
did home feel like? And then we explore home. Then maybe we'll put people into that home and say, okay, you've put this person here and this person here and this person here. Do you want to reflect on what that is? These are my relationships with these people. So it's the idea of the whole. And I think that's really what we work with in art therapy: the whole person, the whole being, mind, body, sensation. And for us to go back to being those people who are able to process all of it, not just cognitively what we think. I think that is the transformation for me.
Gosh, I think my parents are express art therapists because being an introverted kid, not wanting to go out, they encouraged me to paint, read, write, and without actually using the word express art therapist. I think in many cases, most parents are. I mean, they just put you onto things,
I hope
explore.
so.
Yeah, they just make you explore
I
things.
hope so.
All right, Aditi, with that, we come to the end of the final segment, and you've answered them really well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Aditi, thank you. We've now done with the final segment. Any final thoughts for our listeners and viewers, and in general, to people about Express Art Therapy, especially to those families where you have a member or a group of people who really need?
Everyone is creative. Just tap back into that. Remember that the resource has always been there. You've always used it, whether it's writing, whether it's poetry, whether it's listening to a song you resonate with, watching a TV show that you can emote with. The process of arts and emotion, expression have always been there, still there in your lives. Chances are. If you're struggling with anything in the mental health spectrum, please reach out. Talk to somebody. If that person doesn't listen, talk to somebody else. If that person doesn't listen, talk to somebody else.
Yes.
Someone will listen, and to the listeners of the world and the families, and all it takes is acknowledging, listening, and supporting to the degree you know best, or asking someone what they need from you. And that in itself will be a game changer, will reduce the need that is now growing for therapists perhaps across the board. And don't be afraid to reach out to therapists when you need them, as a family, as an individual. This is who we are.
Yeah.
It's not some scary person sitting angrily in a chamber. I think it helps to debunk that. And just in the theme of what we've been talking about is hope. If you can hold on to hope, even when it seems like it doesn't exist, remember that we are extremely resilient as a people. We just
Yes.
need to back each other up.
Yeah. I just add to that saying that to me personally, the most contagious thing is optimism. Optimism is contagious. Hope is contagious.
Let's hope.
Thank you so much, Aditi, for your time. And that's it from Between Us. At Between Us, we always talk about conversations. We talk about stories. And the most important conversation and the most important story is the one we tell ourselves. And I think the most powerful story is to acknowledge who we are. And let's continue doing that. And I hope we continue to have you as our audience listen to interesting and important stories. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Between Us podcast. This podcast was recorded, edited, and processed at Metrol Studios in Noida. The producer is Santosh Kumar, and the associate producer is Samyak Kamble. The Between Us podcast uploads episode weekly, and we'll see you next time.